Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time. We are in Masachet Ketubot, and today is our ninth lesson in Masachet Ketubot. Today we are going to be reviewing Daf 56 through 62. And last week we ended off discussing the fact that the Ketuva has two parts. The main part, which, as we know, is either 200 or 100 zuz. And then we learned last week that the husband can add what's called an addition to or an addendum to the Ketuva. And today on Daf 56, the Gemara asks, at what point is she eligible to receive that extra part, the supplement? Last week we discussed if they get divorced, if they were only engaged. Again, to remind us that when they were betrothed or engaged in the time of the Mishna and the Gemara, it was almost, I guess you can call it half married, as opposed to nowadays, it's very different, and therefore, when they would actually have to get divorced from that engagement, and if they did, she would only receive the base price, the base amount that's in the Ketuva, but not the tosefet, not the addition. So the Gemara on Daf 56 asks, what if they had a chuppah, which basically means the wedding ceremony, but they haven't slept together yet, and then let's say they decide to get divorced. Not clear to me why they would do that, but if that was the case, would she get the tosefet? Would she get the extra part of the Ketuva? And the Gemara says yes, meaning from the wedding ceremony, once she enters the chuppah, even though they didn't have relations yet, meaning, and here really the discussion is, when are they considered married, right? Is it the wedding ceremony, or did they need to consummate the marriage? And here the Gemara seems to say, as long as they had the wedding ceremony, then she would receive the tosefet, the extra part of the Ketuva. Another situation, what if they cannot have relations the night of their wedding? This is called a chupat nida, and it basically means that the bride is impure at her wedding. Unfortunately, this does happen. It's not very common, but it is a complication, and basically it means you can have the wedding ceremony, but they cannot consummate the marriage that night. They need to wait till she actually goes to the mikveh and becomes pure, and then they can be together. So here the Gemara says, what if that is the case? Maybe because of the fact that they can't have relations that night, maybe she would not get the extra, and the Gemara does not have an answer for that question. Okay. The next is, I guess we've been talking about the supplement, the additional money. Let's go the other way. We said that the husband has to give her 100 or 200 in the Ketuva. The Gemara explains that a woman is allowed to forgo part of her Ketuva. Right? She could say, "Oh no, sweetheart, I love you so much. You only have to give me 100 instead of 200 if we ever get divorced." So she has the ability to forego half of that of the Ketuva. There's a machloket whether or not he writes a receipt for it, or it's actually written into the document that he. It could be written that like it's as if he paid her half already, meaning that if they would get divorced, he only has to pay her half. So the question is, does he write her a receipt? It's as if he gave her half, or like, do they write it into the Ketuva? However, right, again, if he can't say, I'm only going to give you half. It can't be coming from him. He needs to give her the full amount. But again, if he writes it down and she agrees to it, so then it is okay. Now, we mentioned, I think, briefly last week, the obligations that a man has to a woman, to his wife. So, right, we know that he has to provide clothing, he has to provide sustenance, and intimacy. So the Gemara asks, what if a person betroths a woman on condition that he doesn't have to provide those things for her? Does it work or not? And this is really a discussion for Masachet Kiddushin. Masachet Kiddushin discusses when a man betroths a woman, can he do it on condition? And we did see a little bit of these conditional statements in Masachet Yevamot. So here the Gemara says that it works in the sense that they are betrothed, but he still needs to provide those things for her. So meaning the betrothal works, but he needs to provide these things. He has to support his wife. The Gemara says maybe because it's a biblical obligation, and you cannot give a condition that you do not want to fulfill a biblical obligation, or it's basically a financial support, and he must support her. And here the Gemara says again that this is again here it becomes a machloket whether the Ketuva is rabbinic or biblical. And if it is rabbinic, the Gemara says, therefore, because it's rabbinic, it needs to be enforced, right? We take it very seriously, and therefore it needs to be enforced. So Rabbi Meir makes a statement here on Daf 56 that if the husband tries to pay her less or write in the Ketuva less than the 100 or the 200, then if they get married, Rabbi Meir sees that relationship as licentious. In Hebrew, right, it's znut, meaning it is an inappropriate relationship because a proper marriage is based on this support. And if she doesn't have that support, then that is not appropriate. And here Rabbi Meir holds that the Ketuva is, again, biblical, and therefore it is an obligation that the husband has to his wife. Okay. The next, the Daf 57 tells us that what happens if a woman loses her Ketuva. There is a machloket whether or not they can be together. And I think this calls for a lovely story. Once upon a time, I got married, and my mother-in-law, who's actually here in our shiur, painted a beautiful ketuva for us, and we were waiting to get it framed, and it was in a box by the door. And unfortunately, fortunately, we had a cleaning lady, but unfortunately, she picked up the box. She thought that it was empty. She shook it. She didn't hear anything, and she basically threw it in the incinerator. We were a few months married. It was a little traumatic. It was a lot traumatic. And my poor mother-in-law, who did this beautiful artwork, and we actually, because of this Gemara, were very concerned. We had always learned that you cannot be together if you do not have your ketuva. But that is actually not the way we hold. According to Jewish law, really you can stay married even if you don't have the original ketuva. We called our rabbi right away. He told us to go to the Judaica store and buy a printed out ketuva, and we had to go to his office and get it signed. And Baruch Hashem, my wonderful mother-in-law painted us another new beautiful ketuva. But that whole story is based on this Gemara, meaning the machloket is it inappropriate for a husband and wife to live together if she doesn't have her ketuva? And we say that really it's okay, meaning we should all know where the ketuva is, but if something happens, it is okay. So that was the lesson that we learned, unfortunately, the hard way. Okay. Daf 57 continues. Rabbi Meir says that if she isn't confident that he is going to pay the full amount, then again, her staying married to him is problematic, meaning she doesn't have confidence in the relationship because she feels that maybe he's going to cheat her in the end. And therefore, Rabbi Meir says they can't be together because she is not in this relationship wholeheartedly. The sages say they can live together because, again, as we said, if you know that your husband is going to pay for the ketuva at the end, you don't need the piece of paper. You know he's going to. You are confident that he's going to pay the full amount in the end, and therefore you could still be together. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 57 talks about how it worked in the time of the Mishnah and then in the Gemara. A couple would become betrothed, as we mentioned before. They would do kiddushin, which is in the Gemara, in the Mishnah is called erusin. Even though modern Hebrew erusin means engagement, in the time of the Mishnah it was much more serious. And then the Mishnah explains that they actually had 12 months in order to prepare for the wedding, and then they would get married after 12 months. They would have the wedding ceremony after 12 months. If they didn't set a date, then later on, the husband can say, I want us to set a date, and then they need to set a date. And from that moment, they actually have 12 months in order to get married. And that 12 months, the Mishnah explains, for the bride, it was about, sewing her what's it called, trousseau, right? She would collect clothing, jewelry, right? She had 12 months to prepare for her marriage. The husband had 12 months to go out and get a job and make money, and then they would get married after the 12 months. The Mishnah tells us that if this is a woman who was already married previously, if she's a widow, then they only need 30 days because presumably she has that trousseau already, and therefore they don't need a year in order to prepare. Now, let's say they set a date. If the time comes and they don't have the wedding, right? Let's say the woman says, oh, no, I want to push it off a little bit more. Or maybe he pushes it off. The Mishnah tells us that from the date that they set in order to get married, the husband already needs to support his wife, meaning he had 12 months, and if for whatever reason the wedding didn't happen, he now has a responsibility to support her. And if she was going to marry a Kohen, a priest, she can already start eating truma, meaning we see her as almost married, right? Not yet married, but almost married. However, if it's Yibum, right, and now she has to marry the Yavam, right, her husband's brother, so then she cannot eat truma at that moment. The Mishnah ends by saying that this is a first Mishnah or a maybe like the first version, but then they changed it, and then they decided that she cannot eat truma till she gets married, meaning officially till the wedding ceremony. The Gemara is now going to explain the Mishnah. The Gemara actually tells us that we learn this from Rivka and Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, that when Abraham sends Eliezer to go find a wife for Yitzchak, and Eliezer finds Rivka, and Rivka's mother and brother ask him to let her stay for days. It says yamim, days, or 10. And now what does that mean? So the Gemara says maybe the word days doesn't really mean days, rather it means a year or what's 10, right? Or at least 10 months, right? They say really a proper time is 12 months. So give us 12 months to prepare, or even 10 months. But so from here we see actually he doesn't let her stay, and she comes back with him earlier. But from here we see what the proper time is, which is a year. Um, the Gemara tells us that a minor, meaning a young girl, and the father can withhold and say that they're not ready yet, and they want to postpone the wedding. A bogeret, an adult, meaning again adult meaning over the age of 12 and a half, that girl or woman gets 30 days to prepare for her wedding. Again, the assumption is she's been sewing and preparing since her, I don't know, let's pretend 11th birthday. So, she's been preparing and waiting. So by the time she's an old maid of 12 and a half, she has already prepared everything that she needs. And therefore, she only needs 30 days. Or the Gemara says, no, let's, be realistic. Even a 12-and-a-half-year-old needs some time to prepare, and she also gets a year. And the law is that she does get a year. Um, According to biblical law, a betrothed girl, a girl who is betrothed to a priest, to a kohen, can eat truma from the time that she is betrothed. However, right, the rabbis decreed that she shouldn't. Again, why? We're afraid that maybe she'll forget and she'll give some of the truma to her family. Again, she's living in her home, in her family's home, and they're not allowed to eat truma. So we're afraid that maybe she's going to share with them, or maybe. Maybe there's a possibility that they will annul the engagement, and then it seems that she was eating that she was eating truma when she wasn't really allowed to retroactively. Um, okay. Daf 58 tells us that again, if the husband needs to support the woman, if they're still engaged, he can give her her food as truma, and therefore, again, because the time passed and she's prepared herself, she knows how to deal with the truma. Or maybe he has to give her 50-50. Half of her food will be truma and half not truma. Maybe the half is when she's pure, she can eat the truma. The other half is when she's impure. Or maybe she gets all of her food as truma, but she doesn't eat it. Rather, she sells it, and then she buys regular unsanctified food in order to eat when she is only engaged. Um, now, the Gemara explains that a woman. Remember, we said that if she's going to be doing yibum, she does not eat truma. Here it seems that the case is that she was engaged to her first husband. She never married him. Then he died, and now she has to do yibum with the brother. So she never ate truma, and therefore she cannot. When she marries the second husband, she does not eat truma from this husband because biblically, the only wife that eats truma is one that was acquired by the husband, meaning actually betrothed and then married. With the yavam, when they're doing yibum, right? He didn't really. I mean, he has a choice, but he doesn't really. And therefore, when he's marrying her, it's not a regular marriage in the sense of he did not acquire her, and therefore she does not eat truma. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 58 tells us that if a husband sanctifies what his wife produces, the question is, does that work? Remember, we said that whatever the wife brings in, right? Let's say she has a salary. That salary goes to the husband because, again, in exchange, the husband is supporting the wife, meaning he feeds her and he clothes her. Now, what happens if the husband decides to sanctify her salary, right, to sanctify it means that they want to give it to the temple, to the Beit HaMikdash. Can he sanctify her salary? And here the issue is um, one, it doesn't exist yet, meaning she didn't bring it home. So can he sanctify something that she hasn't acquired yet? Um, or maybe it's about, she brings in a certain amount, but the extra, maybe that extra he can sanctify, or maybe not. Maybe he does not have the ability to sanctify her salary because it's her salary. Even though he has rights to it. So the Gemara explains a woman can say, if you remember again, last week we discussed, right, she brings in a certain amount of money, it goes to him. He needs to support her, make sure that she, has food to eat and clothing to wear. Here the Gemara tells us that a woman has the right to say, you don't have to support me, and I want to keep my salary, right? Especially if she's a high-powered lawyer, and she says, I'm making $1 million. You keep your, whatever meat and potatoes you were going to give me for dinner, and I'm going to keep my salary, right? It's going to go into my own account. She has the right to say that, right? Because it's a parallel, and she can say, I won't give you my salary. You don't have to support me. So again, here the Gemara asks, when our Mishnah talks about him sanctifying her salary, the Gemara asks, is he supporting her at that point or not? Meaning, if he's supporting her, then he has a right to what she makes, or maybe not. So the Gemara explains that he has the ability to sanctify the extra salary, but not the base salary. And here the Gemara says, but hold on, what about the fact that the salary didn't come in yet, right? It doesn't exist yet. And here there's a discussion if a person can sanctify something that doesn't exist yet. And here the Gemara suggests that instead of him sanctifying the actual salary, what does he do? He sanctifies her hands, right? In the sense, again, think of it as, let's say she's a baker, right? So anything that her hands produce, he is going to sanctify, even though it doesn't exist yet. Her hands do exist, and therefore that could be a mechanism by which he can sanctify the things that she is creating. Again, Daf 59, tries to understand what is hers and what is his. And it seems that the base salary is hers, the extra is his, and he has the ability to sanctify it. And here again, the Gemara reviews for us the idea that whatever she brings in is in parallel to the fact that he is supporting her. Again, or the question is, what about the extra income? Where does that come in? Maybe the extra income becomes spending money for her and is also hers as well. And here the Gemara mentions like the minimum that the wife has to bring in to the relationship. Again, very interesting in the sense of, I would say, modern sensibilities, right? We always think that in the time of the Mishna and the Gemara, the women were always home, and raising the children. Here it seems that the women are working, right? They're providing for their family as well. So that's just a fascinating I think just a concept here in the Gemara. So the Gemara concludes by saying that according to the law, he cannot sanctify her income because, again, it doesn't exist yet. And this is, right, he doesn't have the right to sanctify something that doesn't exist yet. From here, the Gemara brings up another concept we talked about sanctifying. To be mikadesh something means to sanctify it, means you want to give it to the temple. Another word that can be used is konam. Konam is a language of a vow, but this vow, right? You say something is prohibited to you as a konam, and that means it's prohibited to you like a sacrifice. It's not that it becomes a sacrifice, but it's like a sacrifice. And here again, you can prohibit things to you. And here the Gemara adds even things that don't exist yet. And then the Gemara says, or maybe no, you cannot prohibit things to you that do not exist yet, right? They have to exist in the world. And again, here the Gemara mentions the idea of sanctifying her hands. Her hands do exist. And therefore, he can say anything that those hands produce is sanctified. Okay, right, and the concept of konam makes something physically sanctified, and therefore, if she sanctifies her hands, then they leave the domain of the husband, right? It doesn't, right? If she sanctifies her hands, now her husband doesn't have any right to anything that she produces, or maybe not, meaning because the husband has the rights to everything that her hands produce, she does not have the ability to sanctify them, right? Because he has some, like a lien on her hands, right? Not any power, but some sort of a lien on it, more of a monetary relationship. Okay, the next Mishnah is very, I wouldn't say, maybe not very famous, but it is a famous Mishnah because it has practical applications to nida, to ritual impurity or marital relations. So, okay, here's the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us that on Daf 59 that there are actions that a woman must do for her husband. And it seems to be setting up a certain relationship that the husband and wife have. Again, the husband has the obligation to support his wife, and therefore the wife has to do certain actions for the husband. What does she have to do? She has to grind the wheat. She has to bake the bread. She has to wash the clothing. She has to cook. She has to nurse the children. She makes his bed, and she spins the wool. So if we just take a moment to think about all of these things, again, the idea is not that she needs to be the maid in the house. We're going to get to that in a minute. Rather, it seems to be that the relationship is one of, again, if we're looking at it in a different way than we mentioned previously, right? If she is home and let's say the husband goes out to work or to learn Torah, then it is her obligation to create the home environment, right? The home environment includes, right, putting food on the table, making sure that the children are dressed, right? That's the spinning of the wool, making sure that the children are fed, right? Nursing the children, and taking care of the husband's needs. So this, I think, is just a very interesting Mishnah, but it gets more interesting because the Mishnah continues and says that if she brings a maid into the marriage, then she doesn't have to grind the wheat, and she doesn't have to bake the bread, and she doesn't have to launder, right? The maid that she brought in can do those things. If she brought in two maids, then she doesn't need to cook, and she doesn't even need to nurse the children. Again, right, in those days there are nursemaids, and one of the maids can nurse the children. If she brings in three maids, she doesn't have to make the bed, or she doesn't have to spin the wool. And if there are, again, this is implying she does have to do the other things. If she brings in 4 maids, she can sit in her chair all day. So just, I think, fascinating sociologically what is going on in those days. Um, Again, very interestingly, we mentioned previously how very poor they really were in the time of the Mishnah. Here we're seeing the other side of that, of how rich they could have been, right? If they bring in maids, that she doesn't have to lift a finger at the end of the day. Interestingly, the Mishnah ends by saying, no, no, no. The woman can't sit around all day. Rather, she has to do at least one thing. So she has to at least spin the wool. And the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, it is not good for the woman to sit around idly, right? She needs to have some sort of occupation or something to occupy her time. Otherwise, it leads to zima. Zima means again, licentious behavior, right? Her eyes will roam if she is bored, or the boredom can lead to insanity because she has nothing to do, right? There's no Netflix to watch, and there's no Facebook or Instagram. There's no internet, right? So if she's not working and she's not busy in the house, what is she doing? And the Mishnah says, it's not good for people to sit around the house all day doing nothing. So the Gemara is going to talk more about this. Again, talking about specific things, the Gemara says she doesn't actually have to grind the wheat herself. She has to prepare it for grinding. Right, and here, as Lynn says, yes, you're right. Education is very important, right? She could read then if she was literate. And here, right, the Gemara says maybe a wife is only for beauty. Maybe she should just sit around and she's supposed to be beautiful and she doesn't need to work. Again, fascinating because the last daf talked about how she has to work and bring in the money. So just interesting in terms of the different opinions here. And from here, since we mentioned nursing, there's actually a machloket here in the Gemara. If a mother has to nurse her children, right? Can she say, I don't want to nurse my children, I want to take them to a nursemaid? Or does she have an obligation to nurse her children? Or how long does she have to nurse her children? Daf 60 talks about, she can nurse her children for as long as she wants, or maybe she nurses the child only up until a certain age. The Gemara says if it's okay if the baby doesn't recognize his mother and will take, will nurse from another woman, so then it's okay. Interestingly, the Gemara talks about a baby recognizing its mother from okay, it talks about the baby recognizing its mother, and then the Gemara says, well, what about a blind baby? How does a blind baby recognize its mother? Right, because he can't see the mother. And the Gemara says, I think again, very astutely, right? A blind child can smell and taste its mother. It knows who its mother is. And therefore, maybe there is an obligation for the mother to nurse her own child. Here the Gemara talks about maybe it's not proper for the woman to nurse her child more than 24 months. Or the Gemara says, no, it's fine for the woman to nurse him, the child, even 4 or 5 years. So that seems to be a discussion. However, the Gemara says that if a child stopped nursing for 3 days, then the child shouldn't go back to nursing, meaning once it stops, once the child is weaned off, then they shouldn't go back to nursing again. Here, the Gemara talks about a woman who's nursing and her husband dies. So the Gemara says that this woman needs to wait either 18 or 24 months from when the child was born before she remarries. Again, there's a concern that if she gets married earlier, then she might get pregnant. And if she gets pregnant, her milk will dry up, and that the new husband will not want to support the child from a previous marriage, and that will be very dangerous for the child from the previous marriage, and therefore she needs to wait a certain amount of time till she knows she can wean her child off, and then she can get remarried. Okay, if the Gemara says, however, if the child is being nursed by someone else, right, by a nursemaid, or if she weaned him already beforehand, then she can get married right away. She doesn't have to wait that amount of time. If Okay, so the Gemara talks about if there's no way that the woman is pregnant, right between two marriages, they still need to wait 3 months in order to get remarried. Or no, if you know for sure that she is not pregnant, she can get married right away. Okay. What if so now the Gemara talks about the other side. What if a woman is a nursemaid? She is nursing someone else's baby. The Gemara tells us that she cannot nurse her own baby at the same time. Again, I think very sensitively, I don't think that's a word, but with a lot of sensitivity, the Gemara is saying, right, if you're being paid to nurse a child, we're concerned that if you have your own child, maybe you'll nurse your own child first and there won't be enough milk for this other child. Or right, again, you have to make sure that you are responsible to the child that you are nursing. And from here, the Gemara gives some tips on how to increase your milk supply. There's certain foods you should eat. You have to make sure that you're eating plenty, that you're being healthy, and therefore you're able to nurse your child. Okay. At the bottom of Daf 60 and at the top of Daf 61, very interesting ideas. The Gemara brings certain actions of a mother, of a woman while she's pregnant. And it says, right, if a woman eats this, her children are going to be like that. If she does this, her children are going to be like that. Again, if it's superstitious, if it's biological, it's a good question. Is it, ways in order to, prevent certain things? It's just very interesting. There are things that were good and there are things that are bad. One of them was if you eat an etrog when you're pregnant, your child is going to smell good. And they bring an example of a woman who ate an etrog, I guess, her whole pregnancy. And then when they wanted, bisamim, they brought the child because the child smelled like an etrog. I don't know. I ate a pomela every day when I was pregnant with one of my children. He doesn't smell like a pomela, so I don't know. But who knows? Okay, the Gemara on 61 continues that a mother can decide. Again, remember we talked about that it's an obligation or a responsibility for the mother to nurse her child. Here the Gemara tells us that the mother can decide if she wants to nurse the child or not. Right? If she has enough money to pay for a nursemaid, she can make that decision, and the husband cannot force her to do something one way or the other. Right? She has the right to decide that on her own. Again, in the time of the Gemara, it's right, the rich people could afford nursemaids. The poorer people had to nurse their own children. So it's interesting to kind of see what they saw as a priority, or, I don't want to say better or worse, but, what would be the requirement. As we said, right, if she brings in a few maids, she still needs to do some of the work in the house. But if she brought in 4 maids, it seems that she doesn't have to do anything. And the Gemara says even if she brought a large dowry, right? She doesn't have to actually bring the maid. She could just bring a lot of money into the relationship. However, here the Gemara says that there are actually three um, um, activities or responsibilities that a woman has for her husband, and it doesn't matter how many maids there are in the house. These actions are, even though they seem mundane, they could be intimate, and therefore it doesn't matter how many maids there are in the house. The wife should do it, and not the maids. These three things are pouring his drink, setting up his bed. It doesn't mean like changing his sheets. It means like turn down service, like opening up the blanket for him, and washing his hands and his feet. And I think that it's just interesting, these three things. Again, this is, I think, more famous in the sense that these are things that we know for even modern times. When a woman is in nida, when she's impure, she should not do these things for her husband because they're seen as intimate acts. I think it's interesting just in terms of modern sensibilities. These things do not seem very intimate. So I think it's just interesting to think about, first of all, in those days, what that meant, right? I guess if you are pouring a drink, maybe you're very close to the person. So I guess one could say these things could be intimate, right? They could lead to intimacy, and therefore it's something that the wife should do and not the maid. Right, and therefore, as I mentioned, the Gemara says, right, a woman in nida, a woman who is menstruating, should not do these three things for her husband. However, says the Gemara, if he's not in the room, she can do them, right? She can pour the cup, in the kitchen, and then he can go in and take it. So then that would be okay. Or if she does it with some sort of shinui, if she does it with some sort of change, then it would be okay. Um, okay. Interesting from here, the Gemara talks about, since we're talking about foods that you should eat are good for you, not good for you. Here, the Gemara says there are certain types of foods that if a person sees them, they can't control themselves. And it's dangerous if they don't eat it right away. It could lead to sickness. So again, I think just very interesting. Here, the discussion is about like a waiter, right? If the waiter is serving this like a very aromatic or very delicious meal, maybe it's not fair to not give him some first, or to have him taste it, because it's just not fair to him. Okay. Interesting again. I keep saying interesting, but I just think it's interesting. The Gemara says that, Lynn, you mentioned education, but the Gemara mentioned something else. If she has a pet dog, that might be okay because that will keep her busy. Or if she knows how to play certain games, and the game that's mentioned in the Gemara, Rashi actually describes a game of black and white pieces where every piece moves in a different way, and therefore it seems that it's talking about chess. Excellent. So it seems that if she can keep herself, again, either mentally or maybe emotionally stimulated, then that would be okay. Otherwise, she needs to, get out and do something productive. Okay, next Mishnah. If a man takes a vow that he cannot get benefit from his wife, meaning he says, I cannot have relations with my wife. So Beit Shammai say that that's okay if he takes that vow, as long as it's limited to 2 weeks. More than 2 weeks, that would not be okay. Beit Hillel say only for 1 week, and not longer, right? That would not be appropriate. And therefore, we get into a whole discussion about the frequency of having relations, and based on what the person does. So first, the Gemara tells us that students, that people who are learning Torah, can leave their home, meaning their wife, and go learn Torah for 30 days. And then they have to come back to be with their wives. workers need to be with their wives once a week. And here, the Mishnah says that the Torah obligates people to have relations at different frequencies based on their job, and it goes through a whole thing. Every day, twice a week, once a week. Once a month, once every 6 months. You can look up on Daf 61 what those vocations are, what those jobs are. You can look it up, but the Gemara is going to go through this, and I think that this is again a fascinating discussion that the Gemara is saying that there's an obligation. Again, we saw this before, that a man has an obligation to satisfy his wife intimately, and therefore there is a certain frequency that obligation needs to be. So first, the Gemara tells us, the first part of the Mishnah says that if he takes a vow to not have relations, it's problematic. So the Gemara says that if he doesn't give an explicit time, remember we said 2 weeks or 1 week, if he doesn't give a time, he actually needs to divorce her and give her her Ketuva, meaning there's no such thing as having a relationship, right? Having a marriage where a man says, I'm not going to have relations with you. That is not acceptable. It is an obligation that he has to his wife, and therefore he cannot take that vow. Daf 62 tells us that again, the students, it's important to again realize that in the time of the Mishna and the Gemara, you definitely could not learn things online. You couldn't even probably walk down the street to the yeshiva. You actually had to maybe travel to a different city, a different town in order to learn. And therefore, the Gemara says the students can go for a month at a time, but then they need to be home for at least a month or maybe 2 months, meaning you cannot go away for a long period of time. But right, students who learn locally can have relations every night. The Gemara says, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Students who are learning locally are probably in the study hall till very late at night. They're not going to be able to have relations every night, and therefore here the Gemara amends that to say that actually Torah scholars should have relations once a week on Friday night, and that's where the concept of mitzvah night comes. That's actually from this daf 62. There's something special about Shabbat. It could be that everyone's more relaxed, no one's going to work, but that is this daf is where it comes from. And here, right, again, we're talking about, right, the Gemara says, what if someone wants to change jobs? And that would lead to a different frequency of relations. Is that okay? And interesting, again, sorry, I keep saying that word. The Gemara says that a woman prefers intimacy with her husband over wealth, right? She'd rather him be home more than making a lot of money. That's, I wonder what, I guess that would be a matter of opinion. But here, the Gemara seems to say she would rather him home and as opposed to being away for a long time. Sailors used to sail, right, again, across large seas, and it would take a long time, and therefore once every 6 months would be their frequency. From here, the Gemara describes numerous stories of rabbis or students who left their wives for a long period of time and then used to come home. But one story is one student got so engrossed in his Torah study that he forgot to come home. And when the wife didn't see him coming, she knew he always came home on Erev Yom Kippur, and he wasn't coming, and she was waiting and waiting, and she cries, and at that moment, that cry or that anguish causes him to actually die. The Gemara says he's learning in the attic, and the attic floor falls and the person dies. Um, it's interesting to kind of think about what the moral of that story is. I think it's interesting. I like Lynn's comment: cell phones can save lives. I like that. But it gets even worse. There's a story of another rabbi who used to come home again every Friday night, and one time he got distracted and he didn't come home, and they actually thought he died because they knew that he regularly came home, and actually he dies. Another story of a man who goes off to learn for 12 years. And when he comes back, his wife is Zohar. We're getting to Rabi Akiva in a minute. That's the end of our daf today. Excellent. We're going to get to Rabi Akiva, very famous. But before we get there, another story of again, a student who goes out, he comes back 12 years later, and his wife is sterile. She can't have children because she's been waiting for 12 years. And they say, we don't know what to do. Maybe they should get divorced. And they say, well, that's not fair. So basically, Rebbe prays for this woman and God heals her. So that seems to be a happier ending. Another story of another rabbi who goes away for 12 years. When he comes back, he literally cannot find his house because all the roads have changed. And finally, he gets home, and he walks through the door and he says, honey, I'm home. And basically, she has a heart attack and she dies. And then he says, oh, no, and he prays for her and she comes back to life. Again, these are all, I think... Again, the question is, what are these stories trying to teach us? I think that they're trying to say there's an importance to learning Torah, and with that, do not get all consumed, and remember that you have responsibilities in your house, and you need to go home and be with your wife, be with your children. There's a sad story about the one rabbi who doesn't recognize his son, and they learn in the Beit Midrash, and he starts crying because he says, "Wow, if only I would have been home the past 12 years, I wish I would have raised a child like you." Interesting, the mother did raise a child like him, so that's just interesting. But I think that the message is that. As we talked about, women have certain responsibilities, men have, similar, different, but similar responsibilities, and they shouldn't take those responsibilities for granted. And with that, as Zohar intuited, we are going to get to the story of finishing up with the story of Rabi Akiva, very famous story. Rabi Akiva was a layman. He did not know any Torah. He was a shepherd for a very rich man, Kalba Savua. He had a beautiful daughter, or he had a wonderful daughter, and the daughter sees potential in Rabbi Akiva, and she says to him, if we get engaged or betrothed, will you go and study? And he says yes. I think it's just also fascinating that in this story, she's the one sending him out. In all the other stories, it seems to be not with the wife's permission. Here it's the woman is sending him out, and she says, go and learn Torah. I want you to go and learn Torah. And he goes. And he's actually away for 12 years, as Zohar mentions. And when the father found out that they secretly got engaged, he disowns her and he kicks her out of her house. She's very poor and living in a very poor environment. Rabbi Akiva comes back 12 years later with 12,000 students. And before he gets to the house, he overhears a conversation with this old man and his wife. She doesn't see him. And he says, how long are you going to let Akiva make you a living widow, right? She's alone, but her husband is alive. It's so terrible. And she says, if it was up to me, I would tell him to stay another 12 years because it's important for him to learn. And it seems that Rabbi Akiva doesn't even say hello. He turns around and goes back to yeshiva and learns for another 12 years. And this time he comes back with 24,000 students. If that number sounds familiar from Sfirat Omer, from Lag BaOmer, right? 24,000 students that Rabbi Akiva has. When he gets to town, his wife Rachel goes to greet him. She's not dressed in a very fancy clothing, and the neighbors say, like, why don't you, dress up? And she says, don't worry, he's going to recognize me. And she goes and she falls before him and kisses his feet. The students try to push her away because they don't know who she is. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, right? He says a very famous line, right? Sheli v'shalachem shelahi, right? Everything that I have learned and everything that you, the 24,000 students, have learned are all because of this woman. It's a very emotional reunion. The father comes back. He sees Rabbi Akiva. He sees that he became a great man. He, feels bad that he disowns his daughter and says, I'll give you half of my wealth. So it seems that they live happily ever after. The Gemara ends by saying that actually Rabbi Akiva's daughter does the same thing for her husband, that it seems that she learned from her mother the importance of learning Torah. But again, I think that the Gemara is giving us a number of lessons. We know that there's an importance for learning Torah, but there is also, again, as I mentioned, the responsibility that one has for their household. So, and I think that responsibility is both for the husband and for the wife. So I think with that, we are going to end. Be'ezrat Hashem, we will pick it up again next week. Wishing everyone a wonderful week, and it's always a pleasure learning with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Regards from
And
Joshua.
also for the laughs. Thanks for the laughs.
Yeah.